Okay, perfect. Angie Nunatsiavut. Good morning, everybody. My name is Angie Perkins. I am from Nunatsiavut, Inuyunga, which means I am Inuk. I would like to thank everybody for attending today or watching this series, the Build Up Women series. I would also like to thank Saumya Rajaskaran for inviting us to talk about a very special and important topic today, and that is trust and relationship building within the Indigenous community. It is also National Indigenous History Month here in Canada. But I would like to start out, I am right now currently in Winnipeg doing some travel, so I'd like to do a bit of a land acknowledgement here. I am located on the lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation in Treaty 1 territory. I would also like to introduce both Leona as well as Pauletta Tremblet. Leona McIntyre is a member of the Red River Métis Nation of Manitoba. She is Ojibwe Cree, Scottish, and Irish descent. She is currently employed with the Economic Development, Investment, and Trade with the province of Manitoba. She works in the Economic, Labor, and Market Policy Division and is part of the Stakeholder Relations and Communications team. Her role with the province is to help design and develop projects, workshops, training opportunities with Indigenous communities in Manitoba and with her fellow colleagues. These projects are developed around many initiatives such as food sovereignty, entrepreneurship, and cultural ecotourism, to name a few. Leona has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Native Studies and Sociology from Brandon University. She is a registered professional trainer with the Indigenous Leadership Development Institute, an Indigenous owned and operated business that has built a business around by Indigenous for Indigenous. So Leona enjoys learning and teaching and loves to share the beauty of her culture. She is an artist with artwork all over the world and is a published photographer. Leona has operated a small to medium-sized business for the last 15 years and is currently in the process of expanding her retirement, which is to be announced. Congrats, Leona, and thank you for being here. Now, Pauletta Tremblet is also an Inuit from Nunatsiavut, born in Northwest River, Newfoundland and Labrador. She is the youngest of 6 siblings, all 60 Scoop survivors, except for her oldest brother who never made it home. Dearly missed since his passing at the age of 13. Pauletta is also a mother of 3 growing children, 17, 15, and 7 years old. She and her husband of 25 years share their life together with their children in Labrador, which brings enlightenment to their history and identity, as well as strength of the resilience within the family unit. Pardon me. Busy with raising a family, she works full-time with Nunatsiavut government as the Inuit Health Survey Coordinator. Her work history also includes time as a clinical program and manager and treatment facilitator with a family treatment center, field worker, restorative justice facilitator, social worker, and mentor. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree, double major in criminal justice and conflict resolution from the University of Winnipeg, and she is near completion her Bachelor of Social Work degree with the University of Manitoba. She is also a certified Indigenous addiction specialist with the Indigenous Certification Board of Canada and a traditional knowledge holder. Pauletta has also been recognized as a helper and trusted support system for Indigenous people and her family. She also began advocating for children and families at a very young age. Her volunteer work while living and working in Inuit and Indigenous communities grew as her professional portfolio emerged, with a passion for sharing the knowledge gained in the criminal justice and social science field. In the past, she volunteered at the Legal Help Center at the University of Winnipeg and as the Aboriginal Liaison Officer with the Criminal Justice Student Association, held youth rights in her home community, and also assisted as a guide for many people attending traditional ceremonies. She has held many seats within multiple organizations for the CARE, which is the Committee for Advocating of the Removal of Sexual Exploitation, Suicide Prevention, Take Back the Night, and for the Extrajudicial Measures. With the knowledge experienced over time and also gleaned from elders, she has continued to pursue hope for other families that are still structurally affected by systems that displace her and for so many others. Pauletta has continued to provide compassion, spiritual guidance, and support in sharing resources for Indigenous families for reunification and empowerment. So welcome, Pauletta Tremblet and Leona. How are you both doing today?
Great, thank you.
Yes, great. Thank you very much.
Great to hear. So, as I mentioned, I'm very excited to hear your responses in these questions. They're all based around relationship and trust building within the Indigenous community. And with Leona being located here in Manitoba, Treaty 1 territory, as well as Pauletta being located in Labrador, we're getting a bit of a taste from across the country. So to begin, I think we're going to start with our first question. And either one of you can put up your hand first. So how can relationships within the Indigenous communities be created within Indigenous communities? As far as non-Indigenous people, people within urban settings, rural settings, where does that need to start and what does that look like? Okay, I'll pick you, Pauletta.
Okay.
Do you want to go, Leona?
Sure, doesn't matter to me. Sure, I can go first. So relationships created with Indigenous communities. I guess one of the things I've learned as, and I used to teach at the college level as well, and one of the things that I learned is that a lot of my colleagues at the province was that they were afraid. They were afraid to call up a community and, well, I don't know anybody. And I go, well, it's like a business doing a cold call, introduce yourself, build a relationship. And they're going, well, how do I do that? Well, learn about the community, learn what language they are, learn what nation they're from, learn a little bit, even say how to say thank you in their language, something so simple is learning, communities are so diverse. We're lumped in as Indigenous in Canada, but First Nations peoples, Inuit, Metis peoples, we're so different, but yet, we're all Indigenous, right? And our stories are so beautiful to be told. So where would you start? Well, learn about the community you actually might have to work with, or even, as a government employee, learn what treaty they're in, learn what non-Indigenous communities are part of that treaty, because we say, oh, we're all treaty people, but nobody's understanding that close relationship near as much as we should be. I'm in Treaty 2 right now, beautiful shores, western shores of Lake Manitoba. And my non-Indigenous communities that are part of that treaty that was signed actually in my community, Manitoba House, they used to call it Doubtful Post because they never thought it would last. But the non-Indigenous are Dauphin, Manitoba, Asher, Manitoba, St. Rose, some of the communities that are part of the treaty that, even Nipawa, so I just learn about the communities, for goodness sake, and share some of your stuff too. Like I learned in other countries how we are very similar, Indigenous peoples globally, but also even our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters, being Métis, well, I've got European blood in me, and I know a little bit about my Irish, my Scottish heritage. My last name's McIntyre, for crying out loud. And in Scotland, in Scottish, that means the sons of carpenters. And so that's why I like building my my little pallet sheds. Just kidding, but all kidding aside, there's just things that you can learn about the communities you're going to work with, and be so open to sharing some of your own stuff as well. So I'll just stop and let Pauletta jump in. Thank you.
Thanks, Leona. I'm surprised we never crossed paths before. I lived in Dauphin. I lived in Dauphin for 4 years, and that was 2017 when we returned back home to Labrador here. But yeah, that community grew on me. I like the smaller community versus Winnipeg, nearly 1 million people, and I've never felt so lonely in my life in Winnipeg. But when I moved to Dauphin, the sense of community and family was really, really prevalent, and that always kept me saying, Dauphin was like my second home. We made a lot of friendships there and a lot of connections in culture, of course, and teachings. But yeah, Dauphin has a place in my little heart here. But yeah, I'm surprised we never met. I do agree about learning about one another, and that's even before you go into the community. Try to ask people what's important in the community, who are those individuals that we need to connect with, and if there's any individuals or organizations that are providing some sort of service or resource to the community, have those employees, or at least the supervisor of some sort, or the manager, go to the community, physically go to the community, get an understanding of the geographics or what resources are available in that community. I think starting it that way in a relationship to be built in a positive way gives clear evidence that you're making that step forward to learn, and you're open to learning more about what is happening in that community, and especially if they're going to be providing or declining some sort of resource for the community and the people that surround that community as well. I think physically going there, because there's so many times that whether it's provincial or federal type funding would be provided to a particular place, but they're going to keep going back to the same place. For example, they're going to keep going to Ottawa versus Kenora, for example. That's what they're going to be keep doing, and that's the same here in Newfoundland and Labrador. They're going to provide so many resources and funding to St. John's. I don't have access to that. I don't live in St. John's, right? That's over 1,000 kilometers away. So having those individuals that are signing on documents and saying, yes, we're going to provide this, go to the community. It doesn't take much just to go in one morning, fly out the next day, or the same day if you wanted to, or drive, right? I think that would be a start. Physically go there.
Wow, thank you both. I think, to pick up on both of your, just so we could have some takeaways here. I know both Leona and yourself, Pauletta, had stated that, researching the community, understanding the community before you go. And within that, some of what you had listed and what you had talked about, what you have to understand what's important to that community and why, right? Who are the main organizations, the main players within those communities? Who do you actually contact if that's your first initial, interaction? Understanding elders and approaching the elders and understanding protocol is going to be important as well. As well as, I really like that idea, Pauletta, about actually physically going into a location. Geographically, you could actually understand what is going on, where the needs are, where the gaps are, even by just doing a visual assessment and driving around the community. That also includes, giving them a sense of their own lived experience about being in contact. And, just, being local and going to the stores, going to, whatever services that they may have, because some of these communities are definitely small. So everybody meet up at the northern store, for instance. I think that's great. Thank you both for that. That's definitely a wonderful start to the conversation. Now we're going to take a bit of a turn, and this question is more so for everybody to understand what Indigenous people actually have to deal with on a daily basis, especially when they are being approached. And a lot of communities are being approached. A lot of them are being approached for research. A lot of communities are being approached for asks. And when I say asks, I mean, either doing opening prayers, land acknowledgement, any type of activity, especially during this month. So the question is, how do stereotypes, misinformation, attitudinal barriers, and racism hinder the process of relationship and trust building when it comes to Indigenous people and those trying to come in or approach the community?
Do you want me to start again, Pauletta?
Sure.
Okay. Just before I do that, I just wanted to add about the if you go into the community, go back. But you know,
Yep.
like you said, Pauletta, go visit the community, but also go back. Don't make promises and then, you know, not. So you guys can still hear me. I just had a thing. My internet connection was great. Okay. Anyway, so regarding the stereotypes, the misinformation, the attitudinal barriers, and the racism, how does it hinder the process? Well, it steps it back 150 some years, you know. And but that's why I thought educating yourself was way. I almost had a very grammatical error in my speech, but I was going to say way more better. But it's a lot better, you know, in the sense of trust. You know, share who you are as well, because we were taught. I mean, even as an Indigenous person going to school in Canada, I mean, the book I studied called us savages, for crying out loud. How do you think I felt going home, you know, to my community? How do you think my cousins and all of us felt going home in a non-Indigenous school, learning that we were the savages? And like, you know, like, yeah, I got into a lot of fights, but that was why, because I was protecting and defending what I thought was my rights. And so when we have all these stereotypes, you know, uh, you ever wonder why we have those stereotypes? Why people, you know, see us on the news and that, and then they think, oh, what's wrong? Why can't they get over it? Because you haven't learned the true history of Canada. And, you know, like we talk about policies changed Indigenous lives, everything from our education, residential schools, to our spirituality, you know, and so those barriers, they hinder very much. So they stop the process, they stop that relationship building. And then there's mistrust from government to communities, you know. And I mean, as an Indigenous person working for the government, I says, I'm going to change it from the inside. But it's like banging your head against the wall. You only feel better when it's done. And, you know, it's sad, but we got to learn about each other. And I am fortunate enough to work with a group in the province of Manitoba that is all over reconciliation, and they are trying. And even the Attorney General's report for us was bad. And you know what? We're going, well, yeah, because our leadership isn't getting us, all us minions, we're doing awesome. Together, different departments are connecting, but our leadership is just a little bit lagging. And you know what? They're being told, and now our leadership is starting to catch up. And I'm very grateful for that. So yes, it hinders the process in a negative way because we're not getting the full truth. So start learning again, educate yourself, talk to the Indigenous people you're learning about, phone up a community and say, hey, I'm a settler. I want to learn something, you know, like I'm not saying they're going to welcome you with open arms, but geez, at least you're opening the door and you're setting it. You're going to have some uncomfortable conversations. But that's where we got to start. And we got to start moving from that into a good way. So yeah, thank you.
No, thank you so much, Leona. And you know, I like the word that I like the fact that you actually use the word settler or settler ally. I mean, it's grown on me over the years, but I want you to understand, even, you know, provincially, the difference is, I can guarantee you right now, there's nobody in Ottawa calling themselves a settler. Maybe that's a Manitoba thing. I've never heard it once there.
It is a Manitoba thing. I've heard that lots, and you know, as allies, because you know that's how they're presenting ourselves. Like, we are settlers. We recognize that, you know. And Manitoba, I do have to give some of my colleagues a lot of credit because we really do have some allies. Unfortunately, they're not leadership levels. We're the minions, but we're strong.
That's great to hear, Leona. Thank you so much. Very interesting. I think the other thing that you definitely alluded to is the fact that, you know, within the systems that we work within, the education system, the government, these are systems that we have to work our way into, that, or they have to work their racism out of, if that makes sense. But no, thank you for that. Pauletta, any thoughts?
Sure. You know, Leona, you were going into the direction that I was going to speak to, so that's great. We're kind of on the same wavelength there. When you're wanting to try and gather that information about a community or organization, it depends on who you ask, right? Like if you're going to be asking somebody who works in government for an Indigenous government, but themselves are not Indigenous, is that the right person to ask? Even though they might be working in the right department, but is that the right person to ask? Because, you know, it could sway your prejudgment of, you know, where you're going to be going or working into. And having a prejudgment negatively, whether it's through racism or discrimination or any form of bias in any way, that's going to negatively affect that community. And somebody coming into the community to gain more information and constant research, right? I mean, people here in Nunatsiavut, the conversations that are happening right now are people have been over-researched. And for what? What do they see out of all this research that's coming from, right? And so a lot of people are now like just turning away from being researched again, because they're not seeing what impact that's doing for them. Because, you know, there's communities here in Nunatsiavut that don't fly at night because their runway do not have lights. They don't have lights, so you cannot fly. And that goes for medevac, that goes for emergency services. You can't fly into that community. There's communities that don't have doctors, that have never seen a doctor in over 2 years, even though as part of the provincial mandate that a doctor is supposed to visit at least every 3 to 6 months, but it hasn't. It's not happening. So again, go back to answering or asking the right those questions to the right person. Because if you go and ask Minister Hagee, who oversees the health department in our province, he says, "Oh, Labrador's doing fine. We're fabulous." So why did a young boy die from TB last year? You know, why? Because our healthcare is so fabulous? It's not. He's making others in Canada perceive Newfoundland Labrador as being great, that we're okay, you know, we don't need any other services, when our healthcare is in a crisis and it's failing. There's 13 people in Goose Bay waiting to go to St. John's to have heart surgery. Why? You know, so you need to ask the right person. Ask the right person who's going to provide you real information that's coming from the community, whether that's positive or negative. You know, things that are still needed, things that are working really well. And like you said, Leona, the individuals that are working with the people on the ground in the community, you know what's working, you know what's going well, right? And so do I, because we're actually there working. We're not in an office in St. John's that has never stepped foot in Dauphin, for example, or, you know, Gilbert Plains or Nain or Hopedale, for example. They've never stepped foot there. Yeah, ask the right person, I say.
Can I just jump on that, Pauletta? And by the way, I've been to Nain. Right on, I loved it there.
Good.
But one of the things you mentioned was about being researched. You know, and Indigenous, specifically First Nations peoples, have been researched to, you know, the umpteenth. But now they have that OCAP, which they're starting to learn that ownership, control, access, and I believe permission. And that's that, which I think is fabulous. So communities are learning that they have control over that, what their research is now, and they're being involved. So I love that. So I just wanted to jump on that about the research.
Absolutely. And I was a part in my current position last year. I was a part of the research ethics committee that would approve research coming in or not, and they really have to do their homework for the approval to come into the communities, because, you know, our government now, thankfully, that they put that in place to to secure the safety of the communities and the sensitivity that they're trying to gather, and using it for their own benefit and none being returned to the community. So there's always a reason as to why something would be approved by the committee. But the research now, like you said, we have a say. We now have a say into what's coming into our community. Yeah.
Wow, thank you both. I think there's a number of other additional items that you both touched on. Obviously, is building that trust before you go into the community, understanding that, like I had mentioned before, as Indigenous people, we are working within non-Indigenous infrastructure as well as systems in place that were geared or built around us or upon us. I do believe that, you know, a lot of the research being impacted right now, even though we're talking about racism, it's done in a type of way where it's, you know, helicopter research. What benefit is it to the community? And, you know, systemically, this is how racism works. You come into a community, do the research, whatever the research may be, because it doesn't actually benefit the community itself. I think we've all learned that personally, time and time again, no matter, you know, which province that we're in. Asking the right person, you know, is there negativity or any type of attitudinal barriers surrounding, you know, anything like that? I think we also have to acknowledge that within our communities, there is, you know, lateral violence. And yes, you could ask the right person, but is that the right person for everybody? Right? When it comes to leadership. No, so thank you for that. It's the process itself. And, you know, there's a lot of fear, right? I mean, even in university, my own self had personally been emailed by a prof saying that this woman was in fear of me. So that's an attitudinal barrier, that's racism. And how does that hinder the process of relationship building? 100%. You don't trust me. And I don't know what you learned about me, but, you know, going back to Leona's comment about, you know, everybody being called savages in our school books, our provincial school books, doesn't help the situation either. We are taught from a very young age that, you know, Indigenous people are definitely different than the mainstream society. And that's too bad. I mean, you know, but here we are, trying to reverse all of that, you know, one conversation at a time. And I definitely appreciate the both of you and your honesty. So thank you for that. So we'll move on to question, one more question. Actually, we have two left. So number 3 is, what are the top 5, talking about questions that organizations need to ask themselves prior to engaging in a relationship building process with Indigenous communities? Pauletta, I'm going to go with you first.
Thanks. When I reviewed those questions, you know, the first thing that came to mind was, who are the elders in the community? And because the importance of the elders, they know the history of the community. They've seen many people come and go, and, you know, what had worked and what had damaged, you know, the well-being of the community by system or by some sort of historical event like the 60 Scoop or the residential schools. They've seen it. They're still around, you know, they've experienced it themselves. So who are the elders? The second person the second question, I suppose, that I thought of was, again, who are the stakeholders in the community? Because, like, there are different leaders in different departments in a community. You know, if it's the school system, there's an individual that everybody would go to for questions and answers. If it's somebody in mental health or health and well-being for the community, who do I reach to, or who do I contact at the Friendship Center? I think we're all familiar that Friendship Centers in each community provide a lot of resources and services. You know, going to that individual, and what teams are there that can advocate and provide different resources for the community? And I think answering or asking those different questions hopefully could help us to get a better picture, and to also, minimize any harm that could be done by anybody new coming into the community where the trust is not yet even established, or even beginning the first step into building that trust.
Wow, thank you, Pauletta. Okay, so understanding who the community, who are the elders within the community, who are the stakeholders in the community, who's doing the work, who's on the ground. There's a lot of importance behind psychological and mental health and well-being. That's also important while you're going in there, and to always minimize the harm when the trust is not actually established or built yet. Thank you for that. Leona, we're going to move it over to you.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Pauletta. So I actually agree with everything, because that's how the process I would have taken for, like, as a community. And then when I look at it for an organization, I'm always thinking, well, what is your cultural capacity? Like, what do you know about Indigenous people? What have you learned? Like, I worked with a police officer who's my boss at a college, and he says, Leona, I was a cop for 23 years. I says, yeah, but you were on the other side of the fence. Like, what do you were the bad guy to us. So he didn't quite understand, like, yeah, he knew all about, but he knew all the negative. How many powwows did he attend as a 23-year veteran of the police force? How many local events and how many people can he still call friends as that 23-year police relationship? There is a difference, believe me. So the cultural capacity thing, I always want to understand an organization going into, and what are you offering? You're going to come in and take, but what are you offering? I mean, we're gifting people, but we're traders too. Well, so far, I was thinking that, that movie, what was it? About silver gun guy. Geez, all of a sudden I blank, but good trade, well, was it a good trade? So what are you offering us? And what is your mutual sharing moment? Like, what does that mean? What does it look like to you? Also, how will you involve the community? And what is your strategy plan for when you go in? You're just, hi, we're here, we're going to research you. No, what is their level of involvement? And is it at a high level or is it at a low level? Like, be very clear. So that would be the other part. How clear are you going to be? What is your involvement? So I kind of only had 3 questions. Sorry.
No, thank you so much, Leona. I think this is great. Like I said, these are tangible thoughts and, processes that, a lot of our viewers could actually take away, a lot of Salmia's viewers from the Build Up Women series. I'm just going to go over them again, just to, reiterate, what is your own cultural capacity? What do you know about the community? How many powwows, how many ceremony events have you attended? If you haven't, why not? What are you offering to the community members itself? Are you just going to come in and take, or what are you offering? What are you giving back? How are you establishing your own relationship within the community itself? And how involved are you going to be? Is this a one-off chance? Is this something that, you come in, you do your helicopter research, and you fly back out? Or is it you come in, you get your ask, you get the things that you needed, and then you walk away again? I think the most important thing that non-Indigenous people need to understand, that once you build these relationships, we build these relationships, they're lifelong. They do not end, they do not expire, they do not finish once the project's over. You keep in contact with the community and the community members. That's how you build the trust. And if you don't do that, that's where, a lot of the trust is unbuilt, so to speak. The community members will revert back to, saying, no, we can't deal with you anymore. We don't want to do this. You're not benefiting us in any single way. Our relationships are very reciprocal. And I think a lot of non-Indigenous people do not understand that. So thank you both for that response. we're going to move on to our last question, and then we're going to just open up for general discussion. I have a few things floating around in my head. So the last question is, what is your worldview as it relates to relationship and trust building in your community? This one, I'm going to go with you first, Leona. But I'm going to finish off the question. But what is your worldview as it relates to relationship and trust building in your community as a Métis woman?
All right. So I'm all about Mother Earth and gardening and feeding the world and food sovereignty, not necessarily food security. I want our own people to be in control of their food, to benefit economically from our food source as well. So one of the things for me, my worldview is, as Indigenous people globally, we are starting to unite. And in my own little corner of Mother Earth, where I live in my little Métis community in Kennesaw, Manitoba, and Treaty 2, one of the things that I do is share my culture, share the goodness, share. And when somebody does make a mistake, don't jump on them, don't pounce on them and attack, just quietly and respectfully say, can I share something about that with you, instead of, freaking out and pulling out, everything, because maybe they were misinformed, ill-informed, uninformed, we don't know. But it's the for me, my worldview as it relates to trust building is sharing, learning, being engaged and in the moment, and not thinking it's something else. You have to be somewhere else. Like you say, Angie, when we establish friendships, it's a long time, and it's that mutual respect and sharing of our cultures, of, different peoples and who we are, and respecting the differences and understanding them. So we're not freaking out at each other so much, I mean, come on. Indigenous people were warring people with each nations. We never all got along, but there was rules and regulations and laws and traditional unwritten laws. So yeah, trust building in my community is definitely about understanding, learning, and sharing.
Thank you so much, Leona. Pauletta, we'll move it over to you.
Yeah, and as you speak, Leona, I had pre-written some of my answers, but then when you're speaking, I'm like, I'm going to speak with this too. So we definitely, and there's histories there. So, my worldview, I think that here in Labrador and in Nunatsiavut, there's a long history of mistrust, and there is a deep and embedded negative impact that many of us had experienced, our families had experienced. And so that itself is why trust building is so important. And I think that a part of my work, and throughout the years, I've become so comfortable in providing correct information, I think, to a lot of different organizations. And that's the Indigenous organizations too. I mean, when I lived in Manitoba, the Métis Authority is who I had worked for. And one of the supervisors, because the Métis Authority was mandated for Métis and Inuit families. I was the first Inuit hire of the authority in the agency, completely, the very first. And that was in 2013. So I felt it was upon my being that I would share my identity. And along doing that, I took more pride in sharing who I was, and our family and our family history and that type of thing. But then that didn't just trickle from my work, that went into even my school, my children's schools, paying attention into what's being taught to our children. Like Leona, you had said earlier, we learned about ourselves being savages in history books and things like that. Today, the younger children in elementary schools are still being taught not fully complete or correct information about Indigenous groups in Canada. And for Inuit, my children were being taught that we still lived in igloos and we didn't have running water. And that cut deep, because, you know, that's not what I'm teaching my children, but that's what the school system is teaching my children. So I contacted the school, I contacted the school board. Next thing I know, I'm delivering workshops to all grade 3 and grade 4 classes every year. So, but you know what? Those children and my kids' friends, they were really proud and said, and when they were able to answer questions that I asked, those other Indigenous children that were not Inuit, they gladly put up their hand and, you know, answered. So they were learning at a young age, and that's where it needs to start. You know, going into the schools, and even I think it was just in March, January, February, when our schools were shut down, so the kids had to learn online again. One of the readings that my child who was in grade 2 had to learn again was about Inuit. It was the same information that was repeated in the school when I lived in Dauphin in 2013 and 2014. I'm like, here I go again, almost a decade later, and children are still being taught the same thing, practically the same book. And, you know, the teacher became very defensive in a way, who's not Indigenous, but she had married Indigenous person, a man who already had children who were Inuit children. So she felt that she knew the knowledge, and she knew the culture, and she was able to, or, you know, given permission to provide that type of information to grade 2s. I got upset about that one. However, we want to break down that negativity, break down that racism, and it could start at a very young age. It could start in very small groups, and it will expand. You know, my worldview of Indigenous people had expanded so much when I moved to Manitoba in 2010. I was very naive in a lot of Indigenous cultures and groups, very naive. And again, would I have learned if I didn't move to Manitoba? Probably not. Who knows, maybe, but not as firsthand knowledge. And working with Indigenous groups in Canada, in Manitoba, and going to ceremony and understanding, and then connecting and building those relationships. That takes time, not just, 3 days at a year, right? Yeah, thanks.
Wow, thank you both, Pauletta and Leona. I think, when it comes to Indigenous worldviews, how we actually work, how we work within these systems, how we build these relationships, even our simple things like our own concept as Indigenous people, our concept of time. A lot of our time is built around and upon the seasons in which we live, and the regional geographically in which we live. Friendship is huge. Obviously, Leona had mentioned that a number of times. And I think, as an Indigenous person, our worldviews definitely direct us. Our values definitely direct us. How we believe and how we live amongst others definitely directs, our worldview when it comes to relationship and trust building. I think the more closed in community that you may be in, or the remote community that you may be in, trust is essential. Relationship buildings is essential for your own survival, mental survival, your spiritual survival as well, especially in these remote communities. I think, our worldviews direct us most definitely in those senses that makes us feel most comfortable. And, growing up, regardless of whether, you're a residential school survivor, 60 scoop survivor, somebody that's been disconnected from your own culture, I think these are types of values and understanding and, innate knowing and nature and innate, what's the word I'm looking for? They're inherent to yourself. You have that knowledge in your bloodline, in your blood memory. I think a lot of people take for granted. So yes, of course, you'd feel comfortable going into Dauphin. And of course, Leona's comfortable going anywhere globally, because you could see that and you can make that connection. The respecting of people, of our relationships, caring for others, sharing is definitely going to be a huge thing in all of our communities. Doesn't matter if you're Métis, doesn't matter if you're First Nation, it doesn't matter if you're Inuit. Serving and providing for your family, be open and be welcoming. And it's too many things for us to even list. because it's our lifestyle, it's how we live, it's how we grow up. And I thank you both. So right now, like I said, I'm gonna open it up for any type of general discussion for you both. If there's anything that you want the viewers or listeners to understand or to take away from this, if there's one or two points, when it comes to relationship or trust building, if you had a bit of a how-to guide, what would that look like? The first 2 points.
I think that having our own people guiding our own people is very important. And for myself, becoming more educated that I possibly can, so that I could help and provide those services for Inuit families, and working in our own government system, kind of puts me in that step forward in knowing and trying to understand what non-Indigenous groups are expecting of Indigenous groups. And having that guidance and that education and resource from other people in our own government, we're going to build those relationships, and those building relationships would depend on how we all work together. And I live here in Goose Bay. I don't live in Nunatsiavut, but you know what? My connections are there. My connections are in Name. My connections are in Hopedale. And I can go into a community and be very comfortable, but keeping in mind too that they still needed to know exactly who I was before they became comfortable with me. So I didn't go in thinking, my head being all swollen, think like, oh yeah, I used to live here 43 years ago, so I know what's happening. I don't know what's happening. I need that information. But when we work together, this is how we're going to guide each other.
Just pure wisdom. Thank you, Pauletta. Thank you for that. Leona.
Yeah, right on, Pauletta. Yeah, I absolutely agree on that, because here's the thing. I'm all about education. And when we're informed, we make proper decisions. And I just feel like when I'm able to share who I am as an Indigenous person with another Indigenous person, like one of the things we do the most is laugh. And because we're connecting. And humor's allowed us to get through a lot of misery in our Indigenous lives, and since colonization. So I do believe being yourself and expressing who you are and sharing that. Like I go into a community, and if I'm doing presentations, I'll introduce myself, and then I'll say a little bit about my family, and I'll ask, do I have any cousins? Because I want to establish a relationship. And the first one you do is, where are you from? Like, who do you belong to? Unfortunately, though, I do have another thing going on in 10 minutes, and I'm the moderator. So I just want to say, if there's any more, I could hang on another 5 minutes if that's cool. But
No, yeah, you
okay,
know what?
because
I'm just gonna try and wrap it up, but
okay, I'll let you do that.
Okay, well, either way, I thank you both. I thank you both so much. And I look forward to seeing you both again. And from both Newfoundland, Labrador, and Manitoba. I hope you both enjoy the weather and the summer as well. I thank you both, and I hope you both walk in a good way.